By March of 1945, the city of Cologne was dying. Once one of Germany's grandest cities, it now stood in ruins, its Gothic cathedral rising above a landscape of broken concrete and smoke. Allied bombers had flattened nearly 90% of the city. Fires burned through the nights, and the smell of dust and fuel hung in the air. The U.S. First Army was advancing toward the Rhine, sweeping through Germany city by city. Resistance was collapsing, but every street still held danger, hidden snipers, mines, and the ever-present threat of the German Panther tanks. For weeks, the Americans had heard rumors of a lone tank that haunted the ruins of Cologne, a single Panther, stationed near the cathedral, firing without mercy at anything that moved. No one knew who its crew was. No one dared to cross the open square. On March 6, 1945, the U.S. 3rd Armored Division entered the outskirts of the city. The men moved cautiously through the rubble, rifles raised, tanks rumbling behind them. Ahead, the great cathedral loomed through smoke like a shadow of a dead empire. The German defenders were few remnants of the 3rd Panzer Regiment, but they were desperate. They had nothing left to defend but pride, and the belief that a single tank could hold back an army. That day, the Americans didn't know they were about to fight one of the most famous single-tank battles of the entire war, a duel that would be captured on film, studied by historians, and remembered as the Battle of Cologne. As U.S. troops reached the edge of the city center, one phrase echoed through the radio: "We've got movement near the cathedral, looks like a panther." The city fell silent. The hunt had begun. The Panther tank waited, silent and patient, among the shattered remains of Cologne's once busy square. Its long barrel pointed toward the western approach, the only road wide enough for American armor to come through. The tank's crew, 4 young men barely in their 20s, had survived the bombings that had destroyed their regiment. They were part of the 3rd Panzer Regiment, the last defenders of the city. Their orders were clear: hold the square, deny the Allies access to the Rhine, and die before surrendering. The Panther itself was a formidable machine, a Panzerkampfwagen V Ausf. G, weighing nearly 50 tons, with 80 millimeters of frontal armor and a powerful 75 millimeter gun that could destroy a Sherman tank from over a mile away. In the ruins, that gun was a hunter's weapon. As dawn broke, the Panther's commander, hidden inside the steel turret, scanned the empty streets through his periscope. Through the smoke, he saw faint movement, a glimmer of sunlight on metal. American tanks were entering the square. At the same time, across the rubble-strewn boulevard, U.S. infantry advanced cautiously. The soldiers moved between collapsed buildings, their footsteps muffled by dust and snow. Every corner could hide death. Every shadow might conceal that rumored tank. The air crackled with radio chatter. "Eagle One, we've got visuals on the cathedral. No contact yet. Keep low, that Panther's still somewhere out there." Then, suddenly, a flash, a muzzle blast. The first American tank, an M26 Pershing nicknamed Fireball, took a direct hit. Flames erupted from its turret, its crew scrambling to escape. 2 men made it out. The others never did. The sound of the explosion echoed off the cathedral walls. The battle for Cologne had begun. The Panther reversed slightly, repositioning behind the ruins of a building. Its commander smiled grimly. They had drawn first blood. But deep within the haze of smoke, another American tank crew was watching, recording, and waiting. The Thunderbolt of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division. They were about to face the lone German Panther in one of the most legendary tank duels of World War II. The streets of Cologne echoed with the sound of engines and artillery as the U.S. 3rd Armored Division advanced toward the heart of the city. Every block had been reduced to rubble, every building a potential death trap. Snipers hid in church towers, and the enemy Panther still lurked near the cathedral, invisible but deadly. Inside one of the advancing Pershing tanks, the Thunderbolt, the crew waited for orders. Their commander, Lieutenant Robert Early, was only 25 years old. His tank was one of the new M26 Pershings, equipped with a 90 millimeter gun, a weapon finally capable of piercing German armor at equal range. They had just seen Fireball burn in the square. The men were tense but focused. The radio crackled. Panther sighted near the cathedral. Confirmed kill on our lead Sherman. Thunderbolt, you're clear to engage. Lieutenant Early didn't hesitate. He ordered his driver to move cautiously between the shattered walls of a former hotel, using the ruins for cover. The gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, adjusted his optics, scanning through the haze for movement. Then a flash of reflection from the Panther's turret. Target spotted, 3 o'clock, distance about 800 yards. Early gave the order, load armor-piercing, fire when ready. The gun roared. The Pershing's shell streaked across the square, striking the Panther's turret. It ricocheted off the thick-sloped armor, leaving only a scorch mark. The German crew responded instantly. Their 75mm cannon thundered, the shell slamming into a building just feet from Thunderbolt's position. For a moment both tanks paused, smoke drifting, the echo of their cannons bouncing between the cathedral spires. Then Smoyer reloaded. This time, he aimed lower at the Panther's side armor, half exposed behind debris. He steadied his breath, exhaled, and fired. The shell struck true. A violent burst of flame shot from the tank's engine compartment. The Panther lurched forward, then froze. Smoke poured from its hatches as the crew tried to escape. One man climbed out, engulfed in fire, collapsing in the rubble. The others never made it. The duel was over in less than 20 seconds, but the moment was immortalized forever, caught on 16 film by U.S. Army cameraman Jim Bates, who had been filming from a nearby Jeep. It was one of the most extraordinary pieces of battlefield footage in history, the real-life fury before Hollywood ever imagined it. The tankers didn't cheer. They just watched the smoke rise and whispered quietly, "We got her." The city was still full of gunfire, but for that brief moment the square fell silent, as if Cologne itself exhaled. Smoke drifted across the ruins of Cologne's city center. The battle had lasted less than half a minute, yet its impact would echo for generations. The Panther tank still burned, its steel carcass glowing orange beneath the blackened walls of what was once a bank. Nearby, crouched behind a destroyed truck, stood Army cameraman Jim Bates. His camera, a Bell & Howell IMO, still word capturing history frame by frame. Bates had been assigned to document the advance of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division, but what he recorded that day became one of the most iconic pieces of combat footage ever shot. Through his lens, the duel between the Thunderbolt and the Panther had unfolded in real time. You could see the flash, the impact, the fire, and the crew's desperate attempt to escape. It wasn't staged. It wasn't reenacted. It was the war, raw, unfiltered, and horrifyingly real. When the smoke cleared, Lieutenant Early's Pershing rolled cautiously forward. The men inside were silent. The gunner, Smoyer, looked through his sights at the wreck of the Panther. He expected another shot, another flash, but there was nothing. Only the quiet hiss of burning fuel. A few soldiers approached the wreck. They found 2 of the Panther's crew dead inside, and one who had tried to escape, still clutching his pistol. The 4th, the driver, was missing. Some said he fled into the sewers beneath the square. No one ever found him. In the following days, the footage Bates shot was sent to Allied command and later broadcast across America. For the first time, the public saw a tank battle as it truly happened, not painted by propaganda, but caught in the chaos of smoke and ruin. It shocked viewers. It inspired others. It became proof that even in the last days of the war, bravery existed on both sides, and that a single tank, a single decision could change the course of a battle. For the men of the Thunderbolt, it wasn't glory. It was survival. But for history, it became legend. The footage of the Battle of Cologne remains one of the most studied and haunting clips from World War II. The day 2 tanks met in a city of ghosts, and one camera captured the truth. The roar of tank engines faded as smoke and dust settled over the ruins of Cologne. The battle-scarred cathedral still stood tall in the center of devastation. Its Gothic spires pierced the gray sky like blackened bones. Around it, the city lay silent, except for the crackle of fires and the echo of distant gunfire. The American advance slowed as engineers cleared debris, and infantry units swept through the narrow, shattered streets. Every step forward was cautious. Snipers still hid in basements and upper floors. German soldiers, trapped and outnumbered, fought in small, isolated pockets, refusing to surrender. The Thunderbolt crew watched from their position near the cathedral square. Their tank was now famous among their comrades, the men who had destroyed the Panther that haunted the city. But they didn't feel like heroes. The air stank of burning metal and fuel, and the bodies of both American and German soldiers lay scattered in the rubble. Lieutenant Early reported the square secured. Within hours, infantry columns marched in, rifles raised, searching building to building. The once bustling city was now a graveyard, collapsed walls, destroyed trams, broken statues of saints staring over the ruins. In one of the cellars, U.S. troops found a group of German civilians huddled together, mostly women and children. They had been living underground for weeks, surviving on rainwater and bread crusts. One of them whispered to a translator, "We thought the Panther would protect us." By sunset, organized resistance in Cologne was over. The U.S. flag was raised near the cathedral as photographers and reporters entered the square. The tank duel had already become legend among the troops, a story told in mess tents and field radios. A single shot took out the Panther under the cathedral. But for the soldiers who lived it, there was no glory, only relief that it was over. Cologne had fallen. The Rhine was now open to the Allies. The war was nearing its end, but for the men of the 3rd Armored Division, there were still bridges to cross, rivers to secure, and towns yet to burn. The Battle of Cologne would be remembered not for its scale, but for its symbolism, a final confrontation of machines in a dying city, captured forever by a single camera. The world had witnessed its first true tank duel caught on film, and with it, one of the last breaths of Nazi Germany's crumbling defense. When the guns finally went quiet, the man behind the lens, Sergeant Jim Bates, lowered his camera and realized what he had just filmed. For months, he had documented the slow, grinding advance of the Allies through Europe. He had seen dead soldiers, burned villages, and bombed cities. But never before had he captured something like this. A tank duel in the heart of a living city, unfolding in real time, just a few hundred feet away. He could still smell the smoke, the tang of fuel, and the faint scent of burning cloth from the Panther's wreck. Around him, soldiers cheered quietly, but Bates stayed still, adjusting his focus, filming the aftermath, the scorched tank, the cathedral looming behind it, and the men walking carefully through the ruins. That evening, he packed his film reels in a tin case marked Combat Footage, Cologne. He didn't know that within weeks, those reels would circle the world. When the footage reached the Signal Corps headquarters in London, officers were stunned. It was crisp, raw, and unlike any propaganda they had seen. It didn't glorify war, it showed its terrifying intimacy. 2 machines, 2 crews, 1 instant of death and victory intertwined. By April 1945, the film was shown in Allied briefings, then sent to news agencies. When it played in American theaters as part of a movie-a-tone newsreel, audiences gasped. They saw fire erupting from the Panther's turret, smoke filling the frame, and the American tank rolling forward through destruction. It felt unreal like fiction, but it was painfully real. Letters poured into the Army press office. Who were those men? Was it real? How can we see the rest? The War Department kept the names classified, but within the ranks everyone knew. It was Smoyer and the crew of the Thunderbolt under Lieutenant Early. They had become legends not through medals but through film. Decades later, Jim Bates would recall that day in an interview. "I wasn't filming heroes. I was filming men trying to survive." And in that moment, survival itself was heroism. The reel became one of the most studied pieces of combat footage ever recorded. Even historians agree, it changed how the world understood modern war. not as something distant or glorious, but as something immediate, chaotic, and human. The cameraman hadn't just captured a battle, he had captured the truth. When the fighting in Cologne ended, the men of the Thunderbolt finally had time to breathe, but not to celebrate. The war was far from over, and the Rhine still had to be crossed. Their Pershing, scorched and dented from days of combat, was refitted and redeployed within hours. For the crew, there was no time to think about what they had just done. They left behind the burning city and the Panther's twisted wreck, unaware that their battle had already become famous. For Corporal Clarence Smoyer, the gunner who had fired the decisive shot, that image, the burning German tank beneath the cathedral, would never leave his mind. He often replayed the moment in his head. The sight picture, the recoil, the fire. He didn't see victory. He saw faces, the enemy crew, men just like him. The American press would later call it the Duel in Cologne. Soldiers who had been there spoke of it with quiet respect. Some even said the German crew fought with honor to the end. For Smoyer and his fellow crewmen, that was enough. A few days later, the Thunderbolt rolled east, following the Rhine toward the town of Paderborn. They fought smaller skirmishes, ambushes, artillery strikes, and collapsing bridges, but nothing like that day in Cologne. Nothing ever again felt that close, that personal. When Germany finally surrendered 2 months later, the crew gathered for a photograph beside their tank. It was muddy, battered, and worn, the white star barely visible beneath soot and scratches. Yet for them, it symbolized everything they had endured. Smoyer looked at the camera and managed a faint smile. He later said, "That day in Cologne didn't make me proud. It made me realize what war really is, 1 second of decision that follows you forever." In the years after the war, the footage of their duel would be shown in classrooms, documentaries, and museums. But the men themselves faded quietly into civilian life. No parades, no speeches, just memories they didn't talk about. For them, the real victory wasn't destroying the Panther, it was surviving it. And as Smoyer later told a historian decades afterward, "Every time I see that film, I still feel the shock in my chest from the gun's recoil. That's how I know it was real." In the months after the war ended, Cologne was little more than a skeleton of what it had once been. The grand city that had stood for 2,000 years lay in ruins, 80% destroyed, its streets unrecognizable, its people scattered. Yet amidst the rubble, the great cathedral still stood, defiant and nearly untouched, towering above a wasteland of collapsed stone. The wreck of the Panther tank remained at the base of that cathedral for weeks after the battle. Its blackened hull sat motionless on the cobblestones, its turret twisted, its barrel pointing toward the sky, a silent monument to a war that had burned itself out. When the U.S. Army engineers began clearing the square, they hesitated before removing the tank. Many of them had fought there. Some refused to touch it, calling it the ghost of Cologne. Eventually, cranes lifted the wreckage away, and it was melted down with other captured vehicles, its steel recycled, its story left to photographs and memory. Civilians slowly returned to the city, women carrying buckets, children searching for bricks to rebuild homes, priests sweeping debris from the cathedral steps. For them, Cologne was no longer a battlefield. It was a wound that needed healing. In the years that followed, reconstruction began. Streets were cleared, power returned, and trams once again rolled through the city center. The cathedral became a symbol not just of faith but of endurance. Decades later, historians would piece together what had happened in that square. They studied Jim Bates's footage, interviewed surviving tank crews, and matched every frame to the city's layout. The exact spot of the duel, near the corner of Marselinstrasse, became a quiet landmark. Tourists passed it daily, unaware that the ground beneath their feet had once burned with fire and steel. In 2019, the city of Cologne officially honored Clarence Smoyer, then 96 years old, awarding him a medal for his role in liberating the city. He stood near the same cathedral, tears in his eyes, the sound of bells echoing above him. He said softly to a reporter, "We were just kids. We didn't think about history. We just did what we had to do. The city around him had risen from the ashes, rebuilt, alive and beautiful again. But the ghosts of that day, the panther, the Pershing, the fire, still lingered in every stone of the cathedral square. Cologne had been destroyed, but it endured, just like the men who fought there. For decades after the war, the story of the Thunderbolt crew was well known, their names remembered, their faces honored. But across the square that day in Cologne, 4 young Germans had also fought, died, and vanished into history. Their names were not recorded on any Allied report. For years, no one knew who they were. To most, they were simply the crew of the Panther. It wasn't until historians and archivists began studying German army records in the 1990s that pieces of their story reemerged. The Panther that fought in Cologne belonged to the 3rd Panzer Regiment, 9th Panzer Division, commanded by a non-commissioned officer believed to be Sergeant Wilhelm Bartelborth. He was 23. His crew, the gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, were barely older than boys. Some were drafted students from Cologne itself. When the city fell, most German soldiers had already retreated across the Rhine. But Bartelborth's Panther was left behind, its orders vague. Hold position until relieved. Relief never came. Survivor testimonies suggest that the Panther's commander had volunteered to stay, knowing it was a one-way mission, a symbolic stand in front of the cathedral that had defined his home city. He and his crew fought alone, firing at anything that moved until their ammunition ran out. When the Thunderbolt's shell struck, it hit just below the turret, the weakest point. Fire erupted instantly. The loader and radio operator died within seconds. The commander and gunner tried to escape through the hatch, but one was caught in the flames. For years, German veterans spoke of that crew with quiet respect, not as heroes of the Reich, but as soldiers who did what they were trained to do, fight to the end. In 2006, a historian visiting Cologne traced the tank's serial number to a German military archive. The Panther's last recorded crew matched the date and location exactly. Their names were finally documented, though their families had long since passed away. A small memorial plaque now rests near the cathedral square. It bears no flags or insignia, only a simple inscription. In memory of those who fought and died here, March 6, 1945, on both sides. The forgotten crew of Cologne were not villains or legends. They were soldiers caught in history's final breath, their story buried under the same stones they once defended. Nearly 80 years have passed since that cold March day in Cologne, yet the story of the duel between the Thunderbolt and the Panther still lives on, not as propaganda, but as truth captured in its rawest form. The black and white footage remains one of the most important visual records of World War II. It's studied by historians, tank crews, filmmakers, and students of military ethics alike. Every frame tells a story. The fog, the flame, the hesitation before the shot, and the moment when 2 worlds, American and German, collided and vanished into smoke. Modern veterans who watch it often describe a strange familiarity, the same chaos, the same fear, the same split-second choices. It transcends nations and generations. For Clarence Smoyer, the gunner who fired that legendary shot, the legacy was never about glory. In his later years, when he was finally recognized by the U.S. Army, he said quietly, it wasn't a duel between men. It was a duel between survival and death. The footage inspired books, documentaries, and even scenes in Hollywood films like Fury. But while cinema dramatized war, the real film from Cologne stood untouched, simple, unfiltered, and human. In 2020, when the restored footage was shown at a military history exhibit in Germany, veterans and civilians alike stood silently as it played. Some wept, the curator said. For the first time, both sides could watch what really happened and realize neither side ever truly won. The Battle of Cologne became more than a story about tanks. It became a reflection on war itself, the futility, the bravery, and the shared humanity on both ends of a gun. Today, the Cologne Cathedral stands renewed, its bells ringing across the same square where the duel once raged. Tourists take photos, unaware that beneath their feet lie the ghosts of 1945. The Panther, the Pershing, the Cameraman, and the soldiers, all part of one immortal moment in history. And that is the legacy of the duel. A reminder that even in the darkest ruins of war, there are stories that must never be forgotten.